Tonight was electric with anticipation. The Gala was one of the most exclusive events of the year, where the elite of Washington and beyond came together under glittering chandeliers, exchanging pleasantries and power plays in equal measure. The room buzzed with soft murmurs, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter as the who's who of politics, business, and culture mingled in their finest attire. Everyone who was anyone was there, or at least, that's how it felt. But amidst the grandeur and glamour, the night was about to take a sharp turn. Seated at opposite ends of the expansive ballroom were two individuals who, despite their young ages, were no strangers to the spotlight. Hunter Biden, the charismatic yet controversial figure whose name seemed to spark heated debates wherever it was mentioned, and Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, known for his reserved demeanor and mysterious air. They couldn't have been more different. Hunter, with his quick wit and sharp tongue, carried the weight of his family's legacy and the scandals that seemed to follow him. Barron, on the other hand, had grown up shielded from much of the public eye, his towering height and quiet presence giving him an almost enigmatic quality. As the night unfolded, the mood in the room was jovial, even light-hearted. People danced, exchanged stories, and indulged in the lavish feast laid out before them. But not everyone seemed content to let the evening play out peacefully. Hunter, with a mischievous glint in his eye, was scanning the room, clearly looking for something or someone. His gaze eventually settled on Barron, who sat quietly at a table near the corner, a faint smile on his face as he politely engaged in conversation with a few guests. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. A comment here, a joke there. Hunter's casual remarks were laced with a subtle edge, the kind that could easily go unnoticed by most. But to those paying attention, it was clear that he was testing the waters, gauging just how far he could push. Barron, for his part, seemed unbothered, his calm demeanor unshaken. He wasn't one to seek out conflict, and perhaps that's exactly what drew Hunter to him. The tension in the room began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. A few heads turned as Hunter's remarks grew bolder, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of those nearby. It was as if he wanted an audience, as if the very act of drawing Barron into the spotlight was part of the game. But what Hunter hadn't accounted for, what no one in that room could have predicted, was Barron's response. As the exchange escalated, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The dynamic had shifted, and it wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a confrontation, one that carried an unspoken weight. People whispered to one another, eyes darting between the two figures who now stood at the center of everyone's attention. And then, in a moment that would be replayed and dissected for weeks to come, Barron said something that changed everything. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the youngest Trump as he delivered a response so unexpected, so perfectly calculated, that it left everyone stunned, including Hunter. What started as a seemingly one-sided attempt to humiliate had turned into a moment of clarity, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room has the most to say. But what exactly did Barron say? And how did the events of that night ripple far beyond the walls of the gala, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it? Stay tuned, because the story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The silence that followed Barron's response was deafening. It wasn't just the words he had spoken, it was the way he said them. Calm, measured, and with a quiet confidence that seemed to catch everyone off guard. Hunter, for all his charm and bravado, was visibly stunned, his smirk faltering for the briefest of moments before he quickly tried to recover. The room, however, wasn't letting it go. Eyes darted between the two, some filled with shock, others with curiosity, and a few with admiration. It was clear that whatever had just unfolded wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. But how did it come to this? How did a casual evening at a gala turn into the kind of moment that would leave people talking for weeks? To understand, you'd have to go back to the beginning, to the undercurrents that had been building long before this night. For Hunter Biden, the gala was more than just another social event. It was an opportunity to reclaim some of the narrative around his name. The past few years had been a whirlwind for him. Scandals, investigations, and headlines that never seemed to let up. To many, he was a divisive figure, a man whose actions often overshadowed his potential. But tonight, in this room full of power players and influencers, he seemed intent on projecting an air of ease and control. As if to say, asterisk, I belong here, and nothing can shake me, asterisk. Barron Trump, on the other hand, had a different relationship with the spotlight. Having grown up in one of the most scrutinized families in the world, he had learned to navigate public life with a quiet grace. Unlike his siblings, who often found themselves at the center of political drama, Barron had largely stayed out of the fray, choosing instead to focus on his education and personal interests. But his reserved nature didn't mean he was oblivious to the world around him. If anything, it made him more observant, more attuned to the dynamics of a room. And tonight, that awareness would serve him well. As the gala unfolded, it became clear that Hunter had taken an interest in Barron, though no one could quite pinpoint why. Some speculated it was Hunter's way of asserting dominance, a subtle reminder of his own place in the political and social hierarchy. Others thought it was mere curiosity, a desire to see what the youngest Trump was really like beyond the carefully curated public image. Whatever the reason, Hunter's comments grew bolder as the evening went on, veering dangerously close to the line between playful banter and outright provocation. Barron, for his part, remained calm, his expression unreadable. He responded to Hunter's remarks with polite smiles and the occasional nod, but he didn't take the bait. To those watching, it seemed as though he was content to let the moment pass, to rise above whatever game Hunter was playing. But beneath that calm exterior, Barron was paying close attention. He understood what Hunter was doing, and he was already formulating his response. The turning point came during a toast. As glasses were raised and speeches were made, Hunter seized the opportunity to deliver a pointed remark, one that was clearly aimed at Barron. The room tensed, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a moment, it seemed as though Barron might let it go, might allow the evening to continue without incident. But then he stood. The room watched in stunned silence as Barron addressed Hunter directly, his voice steady and composed. His words weren't loud or aggressive, but they carried a depth and a clarity that commanded attention. He didn't just respond to Hunter's remark. He turned it on its head, offering a perspective so thoughtful and incisive that it left everyone in the room reevaluating the situation. It wasn't just a defense. It was a masterclass in grace under pressure, a reminder that strength doesn't always have to be loud to be effective. As Barron sat back down, the room erupted into quiet murmurs, the energy shifting dramatically. Hunter, for all his quick wit and charm, found himself at a loss for words, his usual confidence shaken. And yet there was something almost respectful in the way he regarded Barron now, as though he had underestimated him and was only just realizing his mistake. But this wasn't the end of the story, far from it. The events of that night would have ripple effects far beyond the walls of the gala, affecting not just Hunter and Barron, but the broader dynamics of their families and the circles they moved in. The question on everyone's mind was simple: what would happen next? And how would this unexpected confrontation shape the narratives of two men who, despite their differences, were more alike than anyone cared to admit? The tension was far from resolved, and as the night wore on, the stakes only grew higher. Something told everyone in that room that this was just the beginning, that the story unfolding before them was one they wouldn't soon forget. As the night continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The quiet murmurs from earlier had turned into animated discussions as guests whispered among themselves, replaying the exchange between Barron and Hunter. Some marveled at Barron's composure, while others speculated about what might happen next. The once lively Gala now carried an air of anticipation, as though everyone was waiting for the next move in a game they didn't quite understand. Hunter, now seated at his table with a drink in hand, seemed unusually introspective. The earlier smugness that had characterized his behavior was gone, replaced by something quieter, perhaps even regret. He glanced across the room at Barron, who had resumed his conversation with the guests at his table, as if nothing had happened. For all his efforts to provoke him, Hunter couldn't deny that Barron had managed to do what few others could: disarm him without raising his voice. And for someone like Hunter, who had spent much of his life in the public eye and accustomed to controlling the narrative, this was unfamiliar territory. But Hunter wasn't one to back down so easily. After a few minutes, he rose from his seat and began walking toward Barron's table. The room fell silent once again, the tension palpable as all eyes followed his every step. Some guests braced themselves for another round of verbal sparring, while others simply watched, curious to see how this unexpected dynamic would unfold. When Hunter finally reached Barron's table, he paused for a moment before speaking. "Barron," he began, his tone surprisingly calm, "I owe you an apology." The room collectively held its breath. No one had expected this, not after the way the evening had started. Hunter continued, his voice steady but sincere. "I was out of line earlier. I underestimated you, and I shouldn't have. You've got more poise and strength than most people twice your age, and I respect that." Barron looked up at Hunter, his expression thoughtful. There was no trace of arrogance or triumph in his demeanor, just the same quiet confidence that had defined him all evening. After a brief pause, he extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Biden," he said simply. "It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong. I respect that too." The two shook hands, and the room erupted into applause. What had begun as a tense and uncomfortable standoff had transformed into a moment of unexpected reconciliation. The applause wasn't just for the handshake, it was for what it represented. In a world often divided by egos and conflicts, this was a rare instance of two individuals finding common ground, even under the brightest of spotlights. As the applause died down, the gala gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Conversations resumed, music played, and the evening carried on. But for those who had witnessed the exchange, it was clear that something significant had happened, something that would be remembered long after the night was over. For Hunter, the encounter was a wake-up call, a reminder that strength isn't always about being the loudest or the most dominant. Sometimes it's about knowing when to step back and acknowledge someone else's perspective. And for Barron, it was a moment of quiet victory, proof that his approach to life, measured, thoughtful, and true to himself, was more powerful than any confrontation. As the night drew to a close, the two men exchanged a final nod across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected connection they had forged. The gala may have ended, but the lessons from that evening lingered, not just for them, but for everyone who had been there to witness it. It was a night that reminded everyone in the room, and eventually everyone who would hear about it, that respect, humility, and grace can leave a far greater impact than any attempt to humiliate or provoke. And with that, the story of the gala came to an end, leaving behind a moment that none of its guests would soon forget.